Hi, I'm Hannah. This is Piles of Books, and today I'm going to be talking about my favorite classic love stories in honor of Valentine's Day. Okay, so the first one that I am going to share is a book that I talked about a few videos back, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it here, but that is Christy by Catherine Marshall. So this is a love story, but it is much more than that, but the romance part does come into play, definitely, especially towards the end. So this book is about a young woman named Christy. She's from a well-to-do family in Asheville, and after a church service one day where she hears of some mission work being done, she decides that she is going to volunteer as a teacher in a remote country area known as Cutter Gap. So her family tries to, dissuade her from this decision, but she pushes forward and she goes through with it. And when she gets to Cutter Gap, she realizes that it's not quite the romanticized notion that she had. So she pretty soon after she gets there, she meets David, who is the young preacher for the mission, and then later on she meets Dr. McNeil, who grew up and then moved away to get his education in medicine, and then he moved back to care for the people in the area. So there is a love triangle between those three, and you really go back and forth. It was very hard for me to decide who I wanted her to end up with, who I thought she was going to end up with. And then at one point towards the end of the book, I even thought, maybe she's not going to end up with either one. Maybe that's the point of this story. It definitely keeps you wanting to read more. So this is not an easy love story by any means. It's not just, like I thought with David, she's just going to fall in love. I mean, she really has to work through some things herself. She has to work through some things with each of the men. They have to work through things in their own lives. I mean, it was a very layered romance. And the book is so much more than that, though. I mean, it is, obviously the love story is a main component of the book, but it's not just a love story. This book is so much deeper than that. But the romance was a very enjoyable ride. Okay, the next one that I have is The Shepherd of the Hills. This is by Harold Bell Wright. So in this book, there's kind of a lot going on. And again, it's not until the end of the book where all of the stories converge, where you find out exactly what is going on. But we have another love triangle of sorts. So we have Sammy, who is just a very kind, content, happy young woman living in the Ozark Mountains. Then we have Ollie, her suitor, and young Matt, her would-be suitor. So Ollie goes off to the city to get a job, save money, and then he's going to come back and marry Sammy, and then they're going to go back to the city and live together. While he is away, young Matt is just trying to be, a friend to Sammy, look after her and all of this, even though he's having to really stifle his feelings for her. When Ollie comes back for a visit, Sammy realizes that he has changed a lot. He doesn't talk the same, he doesn't act the same, his interests are not the same as they had been. They just don't have a lot in common anymore. And so then she has to decide if she is going to follow Ollie to the city or if she's going to stay home, with the people that she knows and loves. And she does not know that if she stays behind, that young Matt is going to be there for her. Well, again, the love story in this book is not necessarily, it's not all a love story. That's not really the main focus of the book. What's really going on has to do with the shepherd, who is an old man who kind of comes into the community out of nowhere, and he keeps his identity very hidden. He doesn't want people to know who he is. He has a backstory with young Matt's family, even though they are not aware of that. It does help to kind of, watch over Sammy and take care of her while her father's away. As with Christy, there is way more to this book than the romance. That is a really beautiful part of the story. And I think that it is nice to have, wholesome love stories, on our shelves to read or to share with others or young people in our lives, and this is definitely one of those. Okay, the next two books I have are by the same author, and I feel maybe it's a bit cliche, but I think that I would be remiss if I did not add Jane Austen to this list. So this is my big bind up of her novels. So I just chose my two favorites. I haven't read them all. That's one of my goals for this year. But two of my favorites so far are Pride and Prejudice and Persuasion. So we'll talk about Pride and Prejudice first. I feel like this is a more popular story. There are quite a few love stories going on within this one book, but the main one is between Elizabeth Bennet and the man that she despises, the last man in the world she would ever marry, Mr. Darcy. So again, it's not an easy romance. You know that they're going to end up together, but they have to overcome a lot of feelings on their own before they can fall in love. So the story begins with we're introduced to the Bennet family and all of the girls, and then Mr. Bingley, who is a very wealthy young man, comes to rent a house in the neighborhood, and he happens to have his good friend Mr. Darcy with him. So they're all kind of introduced together at the same time, and Jane, who is Elizabeth's older sister, is very interested in Mr. Bingley, and Mr. Bingley is very interested in her, and their love story there are some things going on with that, but it is pretty much even keel through the book. So, but then, but it is very enjoyable to watch Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy deal with all of their own things, and just the struggle that's there between them, how they grow as individuals, and then ultimately fall in love, and it's a beautiful story. The next one, Persuasion, is such a good one. I feel like it's just not talked about often enough. So the main character in the book is Anne, and she had been in love as a young woman, I think when she was 19 maybe, but her family and friends had counseled her to call it off with the young man, so she did, and she struggled with that for a while. So he went away, and she thought that she would never see him again, and then through a turn of events he came back into her life, and she had feelings for him, but she didn't know if he would ever be able to care for her again. She watches as he befriends another young woman, and she has to just deal with being sad about that, but also just trying to be happy for them. And then, of course, through another turn of events, they are able to talk things over, and they fall in love with each other. And it ends with happily ever after. The last two books that I want to share are again by the same author. So we're going to save my favorite one of the two for last, because I think it's actually possibly my favorite book of all time. The first one is Freckles. This is by Gene Stratton Porter. So Gene, fun fact, Gene is short for Geneva. Before I was ever aware of that, I actually named one of my little girls Geneva, so I kind of have a special thing for Gene Stratton Porter's books now. So this story is about a young orphan. He goes by Freckles. He doesn't know what his real name is. That was just the nickname that was given to him in the orphanage, and he ages out of the orphanage, so he has to find a job, but he has, I can't remember if he's missing an arm or if he's just lame in the one arm, and it's been that way since birth. So he has a hard time finding work, but he does end up finding work for a lumber company as a guard for the lumber camp. So his job is just to basically circle the camp 2 times a day to make sure that everything is up to par. Well, the camp is in a swamp area, and he is not used to that at all. So he kind of has to overcome his fear of being outdoors. And of course, he feels like he can't really defend himself against, like wild animals or something, because he only has the use of one arm. I have that part of the story where he does end up falling in love with nature, the plants, the animals, the birds, everything that he sees every day. So that part of the story is such a fun one. So then while he's out in the swamp one day, there's a girl kind of stumbles into his life, and he calls her the Swamp Angel, and he instantly falls in love with her. but he is sure that she will never give him the time of day because, you know, he's has a lame arm. He has no family, no friends, no connections. She's above him in station and everything. And he just kind of silently pines away for her. And, but they do become friends. The story progresses. He's out, you know, in the swamp doing his job, and he comes across some co-workers who he believes are doing some crooked business. But he wants to be completely sure of that before he confronts them or confronts their boss or anything. He's kind of watching them, keeping an eye on them, and they kind of get the drift that he's watching them, so then they're keeping an eye on him. Eventually there is an accident. He's very hurt. The Swamp Angel plays a huge part in getting him to the hospital, saves his life. She declares her love for him, and then he finds out some things about his past that just makes for a very satisfying ending. So as with all of the Gene Stratton Porter books I've read, and I think I've read 4 or 5, except with the exception of one, the love story is completely unrealistic, but it is, again, it's wholesome, it's safe, it's very enjoyable, and they're just a good read. Now, the last one that I'm going to talk about is The Harvester, and again, by Gene Stratton Porter. So this book is absolutely lovely. This is one of the first novels that I read when I got back into reading fiction a few years ago. So it is about a man named Dan, I believe. He's a bachelor. He lives just out in the woods by himself, obviously. And I can't remember if he makes medicine or if he just harvests herbs and plants and sends them off to the city to be made into medicine, but either way, that's why he's called the Harvester. It's kind of just a silly situation. He decides one day he's tired of living alone and he's going to find himself a wife. He has a dream that night about like his perfect woman, and he sets out the next day. He's going to find her. So he goes to the city to sell flowers, and he finds her, the very girl from his dream. So he just has to convince her, you know, that she is the one for him. He is courting her, he is wooing her, but she just won't quite give in. And he knows that there's something, you know, in her past that she's not telling him, but he doesn't really know what it is. And he goes back and forth from the city back to his farm, and he had been living in just like a very primitive cabin, the one that he grew up in, but he decides to build a cabin for Ruth. And you know, so we see him, you know, spending a ton of time doing that and making furniture and doing just and preparing, you know, his place for his bride. So she does end up marrying him, and he brings her home, and it's not too long after that she falls deathly ill, and he is trying to care for her, and he's kind of running out of ideas of what to do for her. The doctors have kind of just given up on her, but he realizes at some point that it's not just medicine that's going to do it for her. There's something in her heart that is holding her back from life, really. And so he just has to sit with her and help her through that. And that part of the story was so, it was so just lovely. And, you know, you could just feel, I mean, Gene Stratton Porter has such a way of writing that you really can just feel what the characters are feeling. And, you know, he wants her to get better. He wants her to, you know, fully love him in return, and there's just something there that's keeping her from doing that. He does eventually find out the problem, and he's working on fixing that for her, and she is just in awe of how patient and loving he is, and she doesn't feel that she deserves it. And so it does end very happily. It's very satisfying. Again, it's very just wholesome and sweet, and just the love that he has for her, and then eventually, you know, she's able to return to him is just, it's inspiring, definitely. So those are my favorite classic love stories. They are ones that I feel are absolutely worth having on my shelf and are worth reading multiple times through the years. They are ones that I can't wait to share with my kids someday when they are old enough. They are ones that I recommend to friends and family. So I'd love to know, what are your favorite love stories, whether they're classics or not. I'm very interested in hearing and why you like them so much. I hope that you will stick around, and we'll see you in the next video.